Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar from the Rec Code Manager. My name is Paul Rock, and I'm the Head of Communications within the Code Manager team. And we're here today to provide you with an overview session of switching arrangements in the Rec after Rec version 3 go live and the implementation of the central switching service arrangements from the 18th of July this year. Just a slide here to tell you about who we are in terms of who you're going to hear from today. As I said, my name is Paul Rock. You're not going to hear too much from me. I'm going to open the session now, provide you with a bit of a scope of today, and then leave it to a talented team of experts within our team who know a lot more about the intricacies of the rec changes and the obligations. They are Colette Baldwin from the Code Manager team and our Regulatory Design Manager. Anne Perry, who is our Change Delivery Manager within the Code Manager team. Fiona Murray, who's responsible for release management within the Code Manager team, ably assisted by Andrew Wallace from Reco, who is their switching program implementation manager. And we'll also have other people from the Code Manager and Reco service today as well, who will be available to support with any questions and answers raised throughout the day towards the end of the session. A bit of housekeeping before we kick off properly. I mentioned to those who are here at 10 o'clock, we have got a lot of people on the call today, so I do kindly ask that you keep your cameras and your microphones switched off just so we can protect our bandwidth and keep the experience as stable as possible. I will ask our presenters to keep their cameras switched on when they are talking to you though. I think it's a lot more engaging when you can see someone's face when they're presenting to you. Just to let you know that we are, as with all Code Manager events, we are recording the event today. Following the session, I'll be editing the event and making it fit for publication online. A link to the event recording will be posted on the Rec portal, shared via Friday's weekly bulletin, and published on the Rec Code Manager's YouTube channel with all the other event recordings on there as well. We're using our normal engagement tool called Slido to allow you to leave questions throughout today's event. I've put a link to the Slido in the meeting chat with the event code as well. You can go onto that link, you can put in the code, and it takes you into our own event space. And it allows you to post your questions, to upvote other people's questions that are relevant to you so that they're promoted to the top and are prioritized for our questions to be answered. We'll take all the questions throughout the event, but we'll answer them at the end. And I'll be making sure that we avoid any sort of duplication in those questions as well by just going through and archiving questions as they're answered. So I do thank you for going onto that tool, checking it out and making sure that you're leaving your questions throughout. And also right at the end of the session, we'll use Slido as well to invite you to provide us with any feedback about how today's event was run and give us ideas about how we might run events going forward. You can use to get onto the Slido. As I say, you can go to use a browser to go to slido.com and enter the code that's on the screen now, 4343064. Or if you're using a phone with a camera, you can scan the QR code on the right hand side, and that will take you directly to the event space where you won't need to put in the code there. It will take you straight into the place you need to be, and you can start posting your questions straight away. And as I said, we'll pick up those questions at the end. If you did have trouble using Slido, or you don't want to use it for whatever reason, you do have the opportunity as well to put your hand up on Teams, and I'll be keeping an eye on that as well, just in case. Just in case you want to use that function. And as someone in the chat has already pointed out as well, there is a Slido button on Teams. That's the third way to access Slido. You can click the Slido button, it will bring you up the Q&A on the right hand side. You have the opportunity to ask the questions there. All right, I'll move away from that, and when we get to the Q&A section, I'll put the QR code back on screen for anyone who's not had the opportunity to ask their questions yet. Right, the last slide from me today, just to recap on what we're here to do. As I said, we're here to talk about switching in Rec version 3, and I'm just about done, and I'm going to pass over in a second to my colleague Colette, who's going to speak about the obligations set out within the Rec that govern the switching framework. Anne Perry is going to talk about the change proposals that have been going through the Rec change process to enable those arrangements to come into force. And Anne and Fiona are they going to speak through the changes to the wider Rec sort of arrangements, how the service providers interact with the new arrangements, and what you can expect from Rec service provision. And as I said, we'll finish up with that Q&A section as well. We'll widen up our panel of available people to answer to some of the people from Reco and the wider Code Manager team who have the expertise to answer some of your questions. But I think you've probably heard enough from me. So I'm going to say goodbye for now and hand over to my colleague Colette, who is going to, as I say, give you a deep dive into the switching obligations that are set out within the Rec. So thank you, and I'll speak to you soon. And Colette, take the floor.
Thanks, Paul. Just bring camera up. Good morning, everybody. I'm, as Paul said, going to give you more of a whistle-stop tour, I think, of the central switching service obligations that are being introduced into the Rec. So today's session, we are looking to explain to you the transition of from the Ofgem-led switching program to the operation of CSS under the Retail Energy Code. We're going to introduce the new schedules that make up the switching central switching service, and we're going to give you a bit of an at a glance review of those schedules. We're also going to talk about the transition to the Rec, including the movement of the strategic responsibility to the Rec board, covering off the change assurance and release management that will become the responsibility of the code manager, and the service management moves to the DCC desk for switching arrangements and for the Rec code manager for wider Rec support. And there's also a couple of other things I just want to sort of call out before we start moving through the slides. Is in terms of the transition of these arrangements, there's an explanation of the transition documents from the switching program and how they've landed in the Rec. This is a document that we're going to put onto the Rec wiki and will be available shortly after this webinar. We had a question raised recently at a forum. We're asking about whether all the Rec version 3 changes that we're talking about were related to the faster switching and CSS, and we just want to make it clear that all these changes that are being introduced in Rec version 3 have been introduced through the switching program and are therefore related to the switching SCR. So nothing that you're seeing being introduced this time is not switch related. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. So we've got a few changes here to the existing arrangements. These are mostly light touch changes. They're including things, for example, into the existing schedules that are the new definitions that are going to be required. It includes the gas inquiry service coming into the data schedule, and it will also include updates to the metering operations to include the change of supplier activities. So I won't go through those in detail because most of them are quite high level. Next slide, please. So this is what the new central switching service obligations look like. There are 8 new schedules that are being introduced, and collectively they are the central switching service. As you can see, there are registration services, switching data management, RMP lifestyle, address management, resolution of customer facing switching and billing. So they're not, switching is not a single schedule under the Rec, so it's broken down into individual areas that are some more technical than others. Finally, though, although not technically a new schedule, but it's more of a transition from the former SPA and MRA processes with some improvements included, is the last schedule, which is the resolution of customer facing switching and billing. I'll talk about that schedule a little bit more later on. Next slide, please. So, as well as new schedules and as well as changes to existing schedules, there are a number of service updates and service definitions. I'm not going to steal Anne's thunder because I think Anne's going to talk a little bit more about these in detail. So just to make you aware that as part of the changes, there will be updates to these technical specifications and service definitions. Next slide, please. So the first of the new schedules, and this is the registrations services. As you can see, it covers the processes by which registration and service requests are submitted, validated or rejected. It includes processes for objecting and withdrawing or annulling a registration. I think annulling is a new term. Process for deactivating a registration, and processes by which status changes as a result of a request are made, and the circumstances in which proposed registrations are cancelled due to a change in the registrable metering point status. And finally, changes to the domestic premise indicator. So I'm going to bring the next slide up, which will give you a bit of an overview of that in a diagrammatic form. So this is what the service looks like in terms of registration and all the moving parts. As you can see, the CSS sits at the centre of it, and with all the different services and service providers attached to that, and the direction of travel of information defined by the various arrows. Who's tinkering? So again, this is where you would undertake any of the initial registration request, where you would do a switch request, where you do the withdrawal, annulment, objection, or the change in the status. And as I say, the details of that are all found in slide schedule 23. Next slide, please. So schedule 24 is switching data management. And this is more about the classification of market messages, types of data items, processes by which market participants maintain switching data, and the parties responsible for providing the accuracy of switching operational data. So, one for the technical people, I think. Okay, next slide, please. So, central switching services is schedule 25. Again, this is switching related, obviously. It's for the CSS users, how you become a CSS user, process for establishing the public and private keys that you need, process for establishing webhooks, and CSS testing and CSS user undertaking. When I first picked up this schedule, the first thing I asked myself is, what's a webhook? But apparently it's something that enables the CSS to route messages to the correct recipient. And obviously private and public keys are there to enable secure messaging between parties. Next slide, please. Service management. So this is the obligations on the switching data service providers to facilitate smooth operation of switching arrangements. It's where the obligations for the switching service desks reside, and where the management of service requests, incidents, changes and problems are managed. And it's also where demand and capacity and availability of the system are covered, and it also includes the reporting obligations. Thank you. And we've got a couple of diagrams here. This is a diagrammatic of the gas switch process. So you can see all the interactions that you would expect to see between the parties and service providers. And I think if you move on to the next one, you'll get an electricity equivalent, and you'll see that for the most part, it looks very similar. We're just switching out, obviously, the gas and electricity services and parties involved. So, next slide, please. Registrable metering point lifecycle is schedule 27. So this is the process for the establishment of a new RMP record. It terminates how to terminate an RMP, how to amend it, and how to establish them within the ERDS, the Electricity Retail Data Service. It's pretty much what it says it does. It's a very simple schedule, and yeah, so I think that covers off schedule 27 nicely. 28 is related metering points. Again, this is another fairly simple schedule that covers off the creation and maintenance of the related metering points and the relationships to their secondary metering points. Again, fairly simple and nothing overly complex. The next slide gives a little bit more information, which is again about setting out diagrammatically how this would work. So as you can see, the switch request would go to the primary metering point in the relationship, and as part of that, it will then pick up all the secondary metering points, and registration will effectively happen then for all the metering points, primary and secondary, by that initial switch request. So it's important, you know, to take away that it's the primary RMP will automatically switch the secondary metering points to the same supplier and in the same time frame. Next slide, please. Address management. So for each registrable metering point, there are two types of addresses that are to be maintained. We have the metering point location address, or MPL address, which is created and maintained by the GT or the DNO. And we have the retail energy location address, which is, or the REL, which is created and maintained by the CSS provider, as set out under the schedule and in the CSS service definition document. So this schedule basically gives you how the address data is managed. And here is a slide here, a diagrammatical set out of the different parties involved in providing that information and how the CSS is updated. So you can see that the grey lines are coming from GRDA and ERDA into CSS, and that is for updating the RMP. And the REL address is coming out from the CSS to the inquiry services and to the DNOs and GTs. And I think that might have the last but one schedule to come up now, please, is the last one, which is one that you might be a little bit more familiar with, as it's not an entirely new schedule. It is the new home for all the things that you would have been familiar with through the MRA and the SPA that need to continue to exist, such as erroneous transfers, switch reading issues, cross meters, duplicate registrable metering points, misdirected payments and debt assignments. So this is bringing together into a single schedule of the former transition arrangements from MRA and SPA, and they will have improvements built in and changes in slightly in the processes. And I think you've seen some of those changes being brought about through change processes that are happening at the moment with the SDEP in terms of escalations. And as I said at the beginning of this presentation, these things are part of faster and more reliable switching under the REC, and that's why they're included as part of the CSS go live arrangements. And I believe that might be my last slide. It is. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Colette. As I said, we're going to keep questions to the tail. There's a specific Q&A section at the end, but please do enter your questions into Slido at the appropriate point on the agenda. But for now, I'm joined, thanks for putting the camera on, Anne, joined by Anne, who's going to take us through the change proposals that have been taken through the REC to enable the changes going through. So Anne, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So my name's Anne Perry. I'm the REC Change Delivery Manager. So what I'm going to talk about is, I suppose it's more focused on those changes that are coming over from a switching programme into the BAU governance. If we can just move on, I'll talk it through. So doesn't necessarily quite fit with kind of what Colette's covered, but we have had a few questions around what has been handed over and what are we taking forward. We do know that there are a number of switching program CRs that were still outstanding and are still outstanding to be progressed. So we thought it's just worth covering off exactly what is being handed over and how we're going to take those forward through the REC BAU change process. So we have had 3 changes, 3 CRs that switching program have handed over to us. So they are CRD60, D61 and CRD 129. So all of these are and we're going through the switching program governance, but we have now had that formal handover into the BAU. So these are the 3 that have been handed over. Now we are aware that there are other kind of issues that may have been talked about under switching program that may be raised through into the BAU governance. However, they haven't necessarily been formally handed over from the program. So the other one that we have got that's going through the switching related at the moment, which is Change Proposal R40. So this is around the CSS switch synchronization to ERDA at the status of secured active. Now, all of these changes are all to do with the operational choreography and synchronization of messages, but just from different perspectives and different angles. So what we've decided to do is to look at these as a set of changes. So what we're going to do from a change management perspective is to really explore these as one set, to understand from all the different angles, the different types of messages, that the operational choreography, where there are synchronization issues, so messages becoming out of sync or landing earlier or later, just to try and understand what is the root cause of that and the different ways that we can address that. So we'll take that forward as a set and explore those with the service providers, take it forward through industry. So we haven't yet got a change proposal raised to accommodate all of those. That will come once we understand how we want to address that issue, but we want everyone to be aware that that is something that we are taking forward, and we'll look at it from all those angles. I think the other element that we wanted to really highlight to make people aware, that's again coming through from switching program, and this is regarding the switching program's design baseline 4, so that's DB4, and some variations that we're seeing through into the REC and the REC products that have landed. There are a number of non-urgent variations that have been identified between the requirements under the design baseline 4, DB4, and the REC. These are things where there's definitions, SLAs or reports that have been designed, built and are being worked to under the DB4 requirements, but haven't necessarily been reflected fully or totally accurately under the REC. So we are going to assess each of these, prioritise them, group them where they're appropriate, and we are expecting a number of change proposals to be raised to address these. You'll hear more about these changes as we start to take them through the process. We just wanted people to be aware that we recognise there are some variations. We have a kind of clear list of what they are, and they'll be taken forward and taken through as we can get the change proposals raised and progress those. And then if we can move on, I think the other element that we wanted to cover off really was around service providers and very much from a change and a release perspective, what variations we might see within the processes to reflect and respond to basically the new service providers that have been introduced as part of REC version 3 and switching arrangements. But before we just go into those, I think if we can just move on to the next slide, what we'll just cover off first is what are those new service providers? I think Colette touched on some of these earlier. So the diagram just shows the pre and the post CSS switching arrangements and those service providers. And to the right of the diagram are all of the service providers that will fall under the REC governance post CSS go live. And those responsibilities for those services are going to be sitting with RECO, DCC, DNOs and GTs. And if we focus on the key services that are being set up for that post CSS world, what we've got the gas and electricity inquiry service, so GES and EES. These services are existing, but they are obviously going to be in the new world. They're adapting their services to share that CSS data. The key difference with JERS is that this is moving under the RECO responsibility. Under the DNO and GT responsibilities, we've got the gas retail data service and the electricity retail data service. So these are existing interfaces between the existing CDSP service under the UNC, with ExoServe delivering that service on behalf of all GTs. And then we've got the MPAS service that is sitting under the REC, and that is provided by each DNO. And then the new services that are then being set up. So these are coming under DCC responsibility. We've got the CSS itself, which is consists of the address service and the registration service. Then there is the switching operator service. So this is that wraparound service that DCC are providing to manage the service and kind of as Colette mentioned earlier, the new service desk that's kind of in place, and the switching portal, which is where parties will engage with the service. What we've included and referenced on the slide is around the smart metering DSP. So this is actually a SEC service. We've represented it under the REC as the data will be received into the DSP from CSS. And it's really that linkage that is important for REC to understand. And if there are any changes that we're looking to make to any of the services or the CSS arrangements, we will need to consider this as an impacted service and an impacted interface. And then finally, we have the CSS authority, CSS certificate authority, and this is the service that makes the security certificates available for any users that want to do that interface with the CSS. So all of the details of the services that are being provided by the providers, who can access the services, how they access those services, they are all detailed in the service definition documents. All of those, along with all of the new and updated schedules, API specification, technical documents, they can all be found on the REC portal, and I'm sure Paul will share that link along with all the slides to all of those locations. But I think it's key for everyone to know that those updated documents are there for everyone to access, and particularly around the service providers, that definition document is the key one to understand what the service is that's been provided and how. So I think that's kind of the background to the service providers, which kind of from myself and Fiona's perspective, we just wanted to provide a bit of an update on then what that means from a change in release perspective. And if we can just move on. So from a change management perspective, we recognise that we're now working with a wider set of service providers. And so we are going to be looking more proactively to identify synergies across those changes that we've got, so the change proposals and any new issues or changes that are being brought forward. And this is really so that we can make sure that we're starting to think about sets of changes that we can take forward through assessment and then through to implementation. So with a wider variety of service providers, it is more important for us to ensure that its assessment of the changes is aligned, that we understand the impacts and implications on all the various elements of that service. And the best way for us to do that is to take it forward as sets of changes that are impacting similar or the same areas of the service or the systems. So we recognise that this is key for service providers, but we also recognise this actually we think will help REC parties with your assessment of changes that we're proposing and also implementation too. We feel it's going to be a more effective approach for us to take forward any switching related changes, and where possible going forward we'll align those so that we are delivering changes and taking them forward at the same time and then implementing them in a targeted release so that we have that most effective way to deliver those. And then I think Fiona, I'm going to hand over to you to cover from a release perspective.
Thanks, Sam. So at the bottom of the slide, you can see on the left-hand side, it outlines the framework we use for release. It is a linear framework. The first step would be release planning. we currently do that today. However, with the introduction of a wider set of service providers, what we will be doing is where the instances of a release involves multiple rec service providers, we will look to work with those parties to create an end-to-end release plan. That will feed into the rec release plan, which you see today on the rec portal. So with that, following on from doing the release planning, that will allow our technical team to release the pre-release information to you, which will give you the early insight of the information that will be required for your organisations to implement the changes. Off the back of that, we are going to start, I say going to start, we have actually already started it, but it was being introduced as a part of Rec version 3, which is the release feedback survey. So as soon as the pre-release has been published, we will share with you a feedback survey. The feedback survey can be completed by anybody within your organisation that has an interest in the release. So it can have you as an organisation, you can submit multiple surveys. This survey will feed into the drop-in sessions that we have. It will help inform the agenda of those sessions to make sure that your questions and clarifications that you have relating to the release are answered, and it'll also feed into the FAQs. We also have our testing. So we have our testing and technical assurance phase. Our technical teams will work very, very closely with the rec service providers to understand what testing cycles are required to successfully implement the release, what the dates of those testing cycles will take place, and put some technical assurance around that to ensure that we are comfortable and confident that we are ready for the implementation phase. But in line with that, we do have a potential for industry testing. So currently rec service providers, where with the new rec service providers joining, historically they would have reached out to you directly to arrange for industry testing. However, under the code manager, what we'll do is we will identify with the rec service providers what industry testing is needed and from who, what systems, and we will reach out to you to give you a consolidated communication of what industry testing will be taking place, when it will be taking place, and what skills are required to carry out that testing, so you can put forward the relevant people from your organisations to participate in said testing. We also have our training and guidance phase. Very early on in the release planning, we will utilise the information that's provided in the impact assessments completed by the rec service providers. We'll use that to carry out a training needs analysis to identify if there are any training needs required for rec parties, to make sure that you have all the information you need to help you implement the change, but also be ready for the changes post implementation. That will also feed into any guidance documentation, such as user guides, that would need to be updated. So as a result of that, that could lead into rec service providers providing training to you. We will also take feedback from the drop-in sessions and the feedback surveys with regards to any training that is needed. So that will give you the opportunity to have a voice and tell us what it is that you need ready for implementation and post-implementation. And the other thing that we really wanted to call out is around stabilization metrics. That's really measuring the success of the implementation of release. So they mostly get used to measure the technical changes. Are they operating at the expected performance level in the live environment? And we will do all of this prior to release being closed. So this will be from implementation right through to closure. So that will be covered off in the post-implementation review phase. That could also include things such as service desk inquiries that are raised. So where you may have questions regarding a release at implementation, we may set a target around those to make sure that they are at an expected level before we go ahead and close the release, so that everybody has comfort that the release is operating at the desired level before we close it down. And that is everything that we wanted to tell you about with regards to the changes happening around change and release with the introduction of our new REC service providers. So I believe I'm going to hand back over to Paul now so that we can go through some of the Q&A.
At the top question on there today is one of the most recent ones, actually, and that's when the code manager will start to complete performance assurance on suppliers for faster switching, and what you will be looking for. Now, I don't know whether we have any of my colleagues from the performance assurance function within the code manager on the call today, or indeed perhaps anyone who might sit on the performance assurance board from a industry member point of view. But I would assume that sort of the performance assurance will continue. Obviously the performance assurance reporting catalog is a product under the REC, which contains the data that the suppliers and all industry parties are required to report. It will just form part of normal reporting practices. But I don't know whether there's anyone on the call from a code manager point of view who can provide more detail on that.
If there isn't, Paul, I'm very happy to jump in on that one.
Please.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question. I'm aware that the REC PAB, let me stop this call. The REC PAB has been updating its arrangements. It's updated its risk register for switching. It's updated its reporting requirements. Code manager's been working very closely with service providers to make sure that it kind of gets the right information to understand performance. Post go live, it's updated its terms of reference to make sure it's ready for the new switching arrangements. I think it's a really good question around, well, what does that mean for market participants? So I think, Paul, we should probably take that one away and see whether that's something that as code manager we can provide some additional information for parties on what exactly it means for them.
Fabulous. Thank you, Andrew. We'll do that. Great. The next question. With regards to the 8 new schedules, how can I view changes that impact non-domestic suppliers only, please? I've definitely seen some attendees on the call today from the code manager's technical team who run the EMAR service. I don't know. Beth, are you on the call? Are you able to explain whether EMAR can be used to meet that requirement?
It should be able to in the future. At the moment, we haven't completed the linking that would reveal that. So if you look in the schedules, the ones that are mandatory or optional, and look at the redlined versions, then you'll be able to see what changes have happened to those that you're impacted by.
Oh, fantastic. I've got a schedule open. If you don't mind, I'll share my screen and it helps show that for people. Okay. So this is schedule 30, and at the front of the schedule it sets out here the different sections and which parties are required to undertake the different activities, so whether it's mandatory, voluntary or not applicable, and each of the schedules that are introduced will have that at the header of each new schedule. So that's the CFSB schedule. If I just pick another one at random, schedule 28, related metering points, it's that one says it's mandatory for domestic electricity supplies, but not for gas. So because it doesn't apply to gas, so you work your way through each of the schedules, and as Beth said, there's the redlining that will tell you the specifics within the schedule, but the header of each schedule will give you that heads up.
Thank you, Colette. Wonderful. Let's go back to the questions. Okay, I think that's answered now. Top one then. Reco took an RDUG action, that's Retail Design User Group, to provide a summary of new and amended obligations at Rep version 3 to support traceability. Has this been completed? I don't know, Andrew, are you aware of that action?
So I think today is part of that action. So I think what you've heard today from the code manager is a summary of the changes that are being made to the rec, not just to the switching side, but also to the other elements that are incorporated within that wider switching SCR. I think there is some additional documentation that we've developed, which has a bit more information around the changes and provide that traceability between the switching program documentation and the rec. I'll pick that one up post meeting to see what we can provide to parties in short order.
Sorry, Paul, it's Colette again. If you recall, when I opened up the introduction, I mentioned that there's a traceability document that shows you the transition from program documents into rec documents. That's going to be published post meeting I'll try that in English, will be available in the wiki. So it'll be later this week.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, the next action, more of a technical switching question. The next question here. Is it possible to switch a primary MPAN without switching a secondary, or do all secondary MPANs need to be switched to the same supplier at the same time? Do we have someone from the code manager who can interpret that requirement?
That was covered off in my presentation again, Paul. No, the secondary MPANs will switch automatically with the primary MPAN when they're related.
Great, thank you. I hope that answers the requestor's question, but if they do have anything to add to it, either can stick your hand up on Teams or let me know with another question. That's fine. Okay, let's move to the next. The next question. We're a map, so we use GES and EES reporting to establish the supplier of a gas or electric meter. We're still unclear as to what the central switching service is. Is it a service? Is it possible to I guess frame the CSS for a party who's not as sort of intricately involved in the switching element, such as a map?
I can have a go, Paul.
Have a go, Andrew.
So I think at a very high level, we currently have separate gas and electricity switching arrangements. The intention of the CSS is to hold all of the data required for switching and operate the switching arrangements for gas and electricity in a new single combined service. I think the important thing for the map concerned here is that they currently use the GES and EES for their activities to get the information that they need to support the parties that they work with in the market. Those services are continuing under the new switching arrangements. The map should continue to be able to get the information it requires from both the GES and the EES after the new switching arrangements go live from the 18th of July.
Very much. It seemed clear to me. Hopefully that answered the question to the requirement there. Thank you. The next question, have there been, and there was a duplicate question on this as well, so this has been asked by two people. I archived the other one. Have there been any changes confirmed by Ofgem in relation to guaranteed standards of service? Switches 15 days, ETs 21 days currently. I don't know whether we've got any Ofgem on the call. I think, and is Andrew Marto perhaps on?
Yeah, hi there, it's Andrew from Ofgem here. No changes as yet. We're working with colleagues are working with BEIS in terms of the update for this. It requires a statutory instrument, so it's a bit more complex in terms of the change. So we've called this out in the delivery group pack as well. So yeah, it's in progress, but it certainly won't be changed at go live.
All right, good to know. Thank you, Andrew. The next question. We haven't heard any update on how the code manager will be managing Schedule 30 escalations, Schedule 30 being the consumer switching and billing issues schedule, and what actions will be taken outside of R45, R45 being the changes to the STEP messages change. Are there any updates that can be provided? I think we spoke, didn't we, at a recent Rep version 3 event about the new processes that are coming out of STEP and the fact that the code manager is a more it comes sooner in the escalation process and has more of a role in helping to resolve escalations. I'm not sure whether there's any one on the call who has the precise detail around this at the moment.
We don't have...
Oh, you can go. It's all right.
I was going to say, so we don't have the answers today, but we are still working through, and those questions that were asked are being progressed, and we will be able to provide an update. So we are looking to provide details around the assurance team and how they will deal with those code manager escalations out of the processes. And we do have a number of questions that were raised through Change Proposal R45, which were kind of out of the scope of R45, but we are still progressing those, and we are looking to provide some additional information, particularly to provide detail around what the process will look like for contract managers when they're dealing with the escalations. We're looking at making sure that the user guide is up to date. And so we are progressing those. So we don't want people to think that they're forgotten. We will be able to provide an update when we've got the answers and the right information to publish.
Fiona, did you have anything in addition to that?
Yeah, the only addition I have to that is that it will feed into the FAQs for Rec version 3, so will be published on the Rec Wiki and the Rec portal, and the updates to that are due to be published this Friday. So look out in the weekly bulletin for the link to the latest version of the FAQs.
Thank you very much, both of you. Okay, on the next question. I think this is back to you, Anne. How will changes, and I think we're talking about the subsequent changes into the REC that fall off the back of this, but how will they be prioritised? There's a high volume of changes in the REC that still need further info to properly impact assess them. Just maybe a high level overview of how the prioritisation matrix and processes work within the REC change process.
Yeah, so we do use a prioritization matrix, which helps us to determine where the impacts or the benefits of changes will be seen. It is worth being aware that we are looking at that prioritization matrix to make sure that it is still fit for purpose, considering kind of obviously changing environments and situations. But ultimately, when a change is raised and we accept it in, we will do a first pass triage of what is that change trying to address, so what is that issue, where is any detriment felt, and that is what we then use to help to use the prioritization matrix to understand how does this align with the REC objectives and the REC strategy. Is there any areas of concern around parties not being able to meet their obligations because of an issue that's outstanding? Really importantly, it is the impact on consumers and consumer outcomes. So how does a change really impact on consumers? What detriment is going to be resolved through the delivery of a change? We also then look at what is the impact on party, reco or code manager efficiencies and effectiveness? And obviously, is this change going to be driving any cost savings or drive benefits through? So the prioritization matrix currently helps us to then size what those impacts are. It is a weighted prioritization matrix with, as hopefully people would understand, with consumer benefits within there are high. We do need to take into account if there is any urgency that's driving a change as well. So if there is an external deadline that we need to hit, or if there is something that is driving a particular date for implementation, that is taken into account. So we will do that, and then we have to have a look at what else we have within that portfolio of change. And so we then may look at deprioritizing deprioritising something that we are either due to start or have started if something of a higher priority comes in. So we are conscious that, you know, there is limited resource both within the code manager industry to deal with such a high volume of change. And that is something that we are looking at how we can plan and forward plan and use the code's roadmap to really group changes and target areas where we would look at a particular topic and therefore actually progress changes at the same time to look at, you know, particular elements that would mean it's more effective for us, but also more effective for parties and for service providers when we're assessing changes. So what that means is there's a level of flexibility within the process that means we don't just take a change in and progress it right then and there to a set timeline. We have to make sure that the changes that we're taking forward really are the right ones, and therefore we might need to then change what our focus is or to kind of shift what the change team is looking at, so that we are really making sure that we're impacting consumers in a positive way, taking that forward, but also recognising what industry wants to progress and develop as well. So it is a moving picture, but it does mean that through that prioritisation, through the assessment of the portfolio as a whole, we should be focused on the right things. But we do recognise right now there is quite a high volume of change. Some of that is associated with changes that either have coming out of switching programme or in readiness for switching go live. What we are hoping that we pass this peak of kind of items that we've got means that we can then look at what is a realistic level of change that we can deliver effectively, but also industry can ensure can land effectively as well.
Thank you very much, Anne. The next change, the question, sorry, is whether we've published a comprehensive REL guidance document. We haven't seen anything yet. Yes, I can tell you that under the REC version 3 baseline documents page, and specifically the category 3 products within that, there is a number of guidance documents, but specifically one published, produced by the DCC on the retail energy location. There is a guidance document in there. I'm going to put a link to that in the chat right now for the person who asked it to be able to access. This will take you to the right page of the REC portal. You don't need to log in to access it. And around at the bottom of the second section on the central switching service documents is the retail energy location REL guidance document version 1, and the download link can be accessed there. Okay, last couple of questions. We currently receive reports via Huddle, including the MAM 297 report. Will this still be sent via Huddle? I must show my ignorance here and say I'm not sure what the MAM 297 report is.
Shall I pick this one up, Paul?
Oh, that'd be lovely, Andrew. Thank you very much.
So there are a number of reports that are currently provided by ExoServe, and that they will be brought across under the GES arrangement under the REC. So the MAM 297 is one of those reports. It's a paid report. So the RPA, the code manager, the RPA is working with recipients of those reports to make sure that we've got the appropriate agreements in place with those parties, whether it's an access agreement or it's an access agreement amendment if you've already got an access agreement, or it's a supplemental agreement if you're a REC party. So that agreement will set out what the costs are of continuing to provide those reports, and the means through which that report will be transferred. In relation to this particular one, then we understand that the report can continue to be provided via Huddle. I think there may be an option to be sent by email if the party wants, but it sounds as though this party is getting the document via Huddle, and that would be clarified in the access agreement or supplemental agreement that's entered into with that party and RECCO. If parties parties are currently in receipt of these types of paid reports, and that they're unsure of whether they've got the right agreement in place, please do contact the code manager, and we can pick that up.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Last couple of questions. I think this is a link question. Actually, is it right that existing DES users do not need to undertake any kind of accession process to utilize GES at Go Live? We did hold a separate session on EES and GES access on the I think it was on the 20th of June, and you can access the slides from that session via the portal. But just, I think, in summary, and I'm sure I'll be corrected if this isn't right, if you are an existing or if you're a rec party, you don't need to do anything to get access to GES. If you already have access to DES, you won't require an access agreement because you already have an accession agreement in place with REC. If you're a non-REC party user who has already got access and has an access agreement in place, then there will be an access agreement amendment that will need to be signed. And I believe that between the code manager and Exoserve, correspondence has been sent out to enable the continuation of service under the REC arrangements. And if you're a new non-REC party organisation wanting to access the service, then from the 18th of July, you'll be able to make a new application and sign an access agreement by going through the process via the REC portal. I think that's correct, and I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong. I'll take that as a good sign. The final question that's currently on here at the moment, there's still time for more questions if you got them. But with respect to EES and GES APIs, how do we request changes to help optimize our switching journeys? And I'm not sure, is it right that these would sit outside of the rec change management, formal rec change management process? Is this something that would be within CNC and Exoserve as the service provider change processes to control?
So they would, I think, until we know a bit more about what people are wanting to change, we probably want them to come through the change process so we can understand what any suggestions are and also think about the appropriate way to take it forward. If people do want to explore any potential changes, I would say the first way is probably to engage through service desk to get in contact with the change team. We're happy to talk through any suggestions or any potential changes. I know kind of from a technical team's perspective, they are keen to look at optimizing the systems and services that are provided. So this might be something that we can take forward. There's an S-step review that's in flight at the moment, and we're probably going to do similar types of reviews for EES and GES, for example, in the future. So this might help to feed through to that. So I think in the first instance, please reach out through service desk, raise a ticket, and we can have the discussion around potential changes. And then if it is something we will take forward, we'll go out to a wider audience to kind of understand people's desire for change and any of the ways to optimize.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. We have another question now. In terms of the EES API, how do we gain access to this? We currently use, we already use the current API. Someone may be able to answer it easily on the call now, but I am just putting into the chat a link to the GES EES Access webinar wiki page, which has a copy of the presentation slides and a recording of the session. So I'm just going to stick that into the chat now. But if anyone has got,
I can jump in here if you want, Paul. Yeah, so for existing users of the EES API, they will continue to have access to that API after CSS says go live without needing to make any changes. So the security keys for the API will be the same on the 17th of July as they are on the 18th of July. Some parties will be able to access additional information via the EES API. So that's suppliers, TPIs and TPI service providers who will be able to access REL and CSS data. So for suppliers, they will be able to subscribe to additional web service methods to get access to that data. For TPIs, we're asking that any EES TPIs that want to have access to additional data contacts the code manager, and the code manager will work with that party to secure that additional information. And the last thing, just to plug, there is a TEG meeting, Transition Expert Group meeting on Friday, where some additional information on both the EES and the JES for existing users of those services, so they can identify any changes that they may need to make or don't need to make to continue to get access to those services after CSS go live.
Wonderful, thank you, Andrew. Okay, there are no outstanding questions on the Slido right now. I think we've managed to oh, there we go. So another question's just come through. We currently use the API for the DTC flows. Again, do we need to make any changes for the new API? I'm not sure if we've got any API techies on the call today, but I would assume that there's no changes that need to be made for the transfer over into the rec arrangements from the old. I'm not sure if anyone's got any clarification on that. Or
Paul, I think that's probably one to take away. I think if the question is, are there changes to the DTC flows, then there are, and I think we've got there's a spreadsheet that shows the changes. So there's no technical changes in terms of use of the DTN, but in terms of the actual flows, there are some changes being made at CSS Go Live. So we can probably share that. It's been out for consultation before, so it'll be a document people have seen, but we can share that with the papers.
Thanks, Sarah, appreciated. And Andrew, you mentioned the TEG meeting. The question: who's invited to that meeting?
So the TEG is it's a switching program meeting. I'm not sure whether Andrew and Marco can help me out.
Yes, I pick this up. So it's a transition execution group. So it's basically a group we've set up. It's non-governance in terms of format. It doesn't make decisions in terms of briefing industry parties ahead of the cutover. So it's primarily sort of suppliers, like it's basically market participants who be engaged with the program. If you want an invite, if you send switching PMO an email, they can add you to the list.
I think also thanks, Andrew. I think also it would probably sound sensible for us to take an action to make sure that we've captured the key points from that TEG meeting and that we're making those available to parties so they understand any issues coming out of that.
Thank you, both Andrews. And a final question on here at the moment: how can we get an API link to EES and the rel, or check we have the right one already? I don't know whether this is. I don't think we have anyone from the service provider from CNC on the call at the moment. But I think that there is a process for making an application to get access to the EES API. I think that's to be managed through the rec portal. But if you already have an existing API set up, I think you've probably got contacts within the service provider who can sort of support you with config there.
So I think on this one, Paul, just if I could just jump in again, I
Please.
think we'll cover this in a bit more detail at the TEG meeting on Friday. So on the assumption that this is a supplier and they already have an EES API in place, and I have to say I am not a technical person. That supplier will be able to subscribe to web methods to get access to the rel and CSS data. The supplier would also be able to test that API in advance of CSS go live, or after CSS go live, if it's looking to make those changes and then uplift the amended API from its test to production environments.
Thank you for the clarification. Once again, we have managed to get through the questions on there. There's still time, so still opportunities for you to raise your questions. I've also activated a poll on the chat now, which is not on the chat, sorry, on the Slido there, which allows you to present and provide your feedback from today's event, whether you found today's event useful, and to provide us with any qualitative feedback on what we've done well, what we could do better. So I really do appreciate if you can leave some thoughts behind. Helps us to maximize the effectiveness of these events going forward. And if you did have questions that you haven't had the opportunity to ask today, or haven't felt comfortable to ask, there are many routes to get in touch with us as well outside of these sessions. You can raise a service desk ticket either via the rec portal if you have an account, or by emailing inquiries@repmanager.co.uk, and we'll make sure your query is passed on to the appropriate person to answer it. Or if you're a rec party, you'll have an operational account manager, and you can contact them, and they'll be your sort of immediate point of contact in to help you navigate the changing code arrangements as well. Or of course, you can get in touch with us or give us a call if you know someone in the code manager team, and we can just point you in the right direction. Either way, we're more than happy to help. And as we said, we'll be publishing the recording from this event and the slides within the next few days, once we've made the appropriate edits, uploaded it to YouTube and all that kind of stuff. But I would imagine that no later than end of Thursday we'll be able to share with you the recording, and by Friday morning we'll put a link into the Rep Weekly Bulletin so that you can access the recording and share it with your colleagues, and it won't be you won't need a Rep Portal account to access the slides or the YouTube recording either. It will be available for you to share as widely as you need to keep your colleagues engaged. We've run a number of these Rep version 3 readiness events over the course of the last month. This is, I think, the last event for Rep version 3 that we have scheduled in advance of the release at the moment. But we do have some drop-in sessions that we're scheduling for the days and weeks immediately following the release. An opportunity for you to come along and join a panel of code manager and service provider representatives who can help you with any questions that you have in the immediate sort of days and weeks following the release, if you're struggling to integrate any element of the new service. So we welcome you along to those, and we'll share details about those sessions in the coming days and weeks. But otherwise, just checking. Oh, actually, I've had a couple last questions come through on Slido, so I'm just going to flick back a page there, so we can pick up these because we do still have a little bit of time. The first question there, well, I think it's a single question, isn't it? So we asked CNC about subscribing to new web methods. They said we need to enable parties to use the new web methods. Reco are defining who should have access in production from the 18th of July. Does this mean they're waiting an update from
I'm
Reco?
happy to pick this one up,
Please,
Paul.
Andrew. Yeah.
As I said, it's the suppliers who are getting access to the new data and the TPIs from CSS Go Live. We obviously need to be very clear and careful and make sure that the right parties access this information from CSS Go Live. We are working with CNC and the Code Manager to make sure that we've got clean data and that access is provided to the right parties. So it sounds like this party is it's a supplier. They're active in the market. I don't believe that there will be any issues with that party accessing the rel and the CSS data from CSS Go Live.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Andrew. Appreciated.
Just to add to that, Andrew, though, but if it is a TPI, then they'll need to contact the service desk, because a comms has gone out to TPIs to see if they need the extra data, and that is something that we need a confirmation from the TPI that they do actually need the extra data.
Fabulous. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay. I think we're going to call it to a close. We'll make sure, as I say, the recording is published in the coming days. Feel free to get in touch if you do have any more questions outside of the event. Thank you all very much for your great questions today. Thank you very much to all the speakers and the support teams from Reco and Ofgem as well, who have helped answer and field the questions as they come in. Hopefully you have derived some value from this session. But as I say, if anything does come up, we're always around to support any questions that come up. I'll leave the opportunity for feedback open for a while longer, but just so you know as well, there's your email address for us, inquiries@repmanager.co.uk, if you didn't have any follow-up questions that you didn't get around to asking. But I'll give you 15 minutes back into your diaries today and say thank you very much for attending today's webinar. It's been a pleasure to host you, and I look forward to speaking to you all very soon.